Okay, so this is another exemplar response to another sample paper from the exam board for component 2. So we're going to start by looking at section A, television and crime drama using Luther. Now, I have no idea what clip they had in mind for this, so for this I used Luther clip with countdowns for mock GCSE media exam new spec. So that was one in my playlist if you want to have a look at that. So it's the first clip I made up with the countdowns, the one with Alice on the phone as she's crying, as she's or as we know she's killed her parents, but we don't know that when the clip is playing. Okay, but we don't know that when we first watch the actual scene. After viewing the extract, use your notes to answer question 1, the paper said. And here is the question in this paper. Representations 1A. How does this extract represent a version of reality? Explore specific aspects of media language in your response. And it is worth 10 marks. And here's my answer. The behaviour of Alice as she rings for the police is quite realistic, because she is barely able to speak for her crying, and this would be quite realistic if you had found your parents murdered. However, it could be argued that since we know she fakes emotions, that someone as devoid of emotion as her would be incapable of such a realistic performance. Nonetheless, the shot of the father's corpse isn't too realistic either, because he was shot in the head while sitting, so there would be blood splattered everywhere, not just a pool of blood under his head on the desk and a few runs of blood on the window. Not only that, but the writers have been too rhythmic with the dialogue, such as when Luther and Rose, his boss, are discussing the terms of his return to the force, which is delivered fast and yet has no stutters and very few pauses. In real life, Rose would have to deal with Luther's return to the force in a much more formal way, with meetings, records of meetings and signed paperwork. It wouldn't simply be a case of, do you want to come back? Okay then. It could also be argued that the narrative is unrealistic, since Luther is found by Rose at the location where he was considered to have committed an unprofessional act, for which he had been suspended in the first place. It seems a bit unrealistic that Rose would not find that a bit curious and would either suggest guilt, because we know Luther could have saved Henry but didn't, so did actually commit a crime, and or continuing psychological problems, because he is spending time he is meant to be recuperating at the very place that caused his mental illness. The most obvious detraction of realism in the clip is the use of music. Whilst the acting could be argued as being realistic, the use of music is there to ramp up the drama, and as such takes away from the reality the programme is trying to convey. Overall, the programme would have been more realistic with more silence between conversations, between characters, or at least stutters, pauses and a few ums, and less expositional dialogue between characters that is only there for the sake of telling the audience key plot points rather than showing them. And I got the full 10 marks. B. To what extent are gender stereotypes used in this extract? Explore one character in detail in your response, and this is worth 10 marks as well. My answer. Luther is a gender stereotype because he is someone who makes all business and behaves in a serious manner most of the time. He is also broody and a bit of a loner, both stereotypically masculine traits, such as when he is found looking down the hole alone by Rose at the crime scene. For someone so psychologically damaged, he doesn't seem so disturbed at the crime scene. The lone wolf gender stereotype is mostly used with male detectives in these shows and rarely women detective characters, whom are often paired and need emotional support from others. Furthermore, for someone whom has just won a tribunal which could have ruined his life, he shows very little emotion, and you'd think he would, especially in front of someone he clearly feels at ease with, i.e. Rose. When Luther walks out of the factory with Rose, Luther can be seen swaggering as he walks, and this is a stereotypically manly way to walk. When Luther discusses with Rose that his trial separation with his wife Zoe hasn't worked out, then we have two gender stereotypes in play. The first is that the man who wants the woman back is the innocent one whom should be forgiven. The other stereotype is the unfeeling woman whom doesn't want to get back with the husband and therefore is represented in a negative light, regardless of her views on the deterioration of the relationship. Gender stereotyping has been used when Alice is first seen crying on the phone when reporting the murder of her family. Although we know with hindsight that she is acting, the TV show itself at least plays on the stereotype that women cry hysterically when faced with killings in order to divert our expectations that Alice is the killer. And that got the full 10 marks. Media industries. How do production processes influence crime dramas or sitcoms? Refer to examples you have studied to support your response. And this is worth 10 marks. Luther is broadcast on the BBC, a public service broadcaster with a remit set out by a royal charter to provide audiences with a diverse mix of content that educates, entertains and informs. Luther, as a contemporary TV crime drama, fundamentally fulfills the BBC's aim to entertain its audience. Despite their being publicly funded, the BBC makes a profit with Luther's broadcast on BBC America, a commercial-funded channel that relies on advertising revenue to make programmes. By contrast, The Sweeney was broadcast on ITV, which relies on advertising to fund its programming. This means that the programmes ITV makes and broadcasts have to be as entertaining as possible in order to attract companies that want to advertise and sponsor their programmes during their airing. This means, though, that ITV do not have any requirement to educate nor inform in the same way the BBC is required to. Indeed, ITV has always generally been known as the channel of game shows and soap operas since it first began in 1955. These shows are strictly entertainment and are enjoyed specifically because they do not demand much attention from audiences in the same way as many educational BBC programmes do. The Sweeney was one of the first British cop shows to borrow exciting American cop show ideas such as car chases and violence between cops and villains. In that sense, that particular production process not only influenced The Sweeney but also many other British cop shows ever since. And that got the full 10 marks.